Hi, before we start our story today, I just want to show you something that I found at the bottom of a pile of books at church. Now you can see it's quite an old Bible and it's got an elastic band on it. Well, that's because, sadly, the Bible has fallen apart. It must have been used a lot. Anyway, I thought it might be quite useful to remind ourselves how the Bible is made up. I'm sure you already know that a Bible is made up of lots of little books all stuck together. You probably also know that it's made up of two parts, an old part and a new part. The old part comes first, and we call it the Old Testament. And in there we've got stories about God's people, such as Jonah and the whale. There's Daniel in the lion's den, Ruth, Abraham, and Noah's Ark, and all sorts of other stories that I'm sure you've heard of. And then the second half, the New Testament, is all about what happened when Jesus came to the earth and what happened afterwards. So there we've got Zacchaeus and lots of other stories. But did you know that between the two parts, the New Testament and the Old Testament, there was actually a great big gap of 400 years when nobody heard any messages from God, or at least none were written down. So really, it was like there was a great big load of blank pages, and the people living at those times were just waiting and waiting to hear from God. Now, we do know that something quite bad happened in those times. The Roman army invaded God's land, God's people's land, and life was really hard for them. We know that some of God's people gave up listening to him and grumbled that God hadn't saved them from the Romans. But other people carried on listening to God. They loved to read the stories in the Old Testament, and they particularly loved a story, a promise from God about a rescuer who was going to come and save them, and they called him the Messiah. And those people weren't so much grumbling, but they were just waiting and waiting and waiting. Anyway, our story today is about two people who were waiting, and the story actually comes right from the very beginning of the New Testament, just at the end of these blank pages. The story is about a lady called Elizabeth and her husband Zachariah, but I'll just call them Liz and Zach for short. They were waiting for God to send his special rescuer. But they had also spent a lot of time waiting for something else as well. When they first got married, what they really wanted was a baby. But for some reason, Liz could not have a baby. For many years they prayed to God, asking him to make it possible for them to have a baby, but sadly they were still waiting. And they may have even given up hope because they were getting quite old. But being godly people, they carried on loving God and following his ways. And they tried their best to get on with life. Anyway, one day, it was Zach's turn to go and do a very special job at the temple where he worked. He had to go into a special part of the temple on his own, while all the other people stayed outside praying to God. Suddenly, an angel appeared. The angel said, "Your prayers have been heard. Your wife will have a baby son, and you must call him John. He will have a special job, bringing people to God and getting them ready for the Lord to come." Zach wondered if the angel was talking about the special rescuer who they had been waiting for. But he couldn't really believe that Liz would have a baby. So he questioned the angel and said, "How do I know that it's true?" The angel answered,
God sent me to speak to you and tell you this good news. But you have not believed, and so you will be unable to speak until the day that it comes true." When Zach finally came out of the temple, he could not speak. So he had to use sign language to tell the people everything he had seen and heard. And do you know what? Now, Elizabeth has even more waiting to do, but only 9 months. Yes, at last, after all these years, she was going to have a baby. Her waiting would soon be over.
But we'll find out more about what happened next week. Anyway, this story makes me think about things and people that I've been praying about for a long time. I've been waiting and waiting and waiting. I ask God again and again, but am I a bit like Zechariah? Have I got so used to saying the same things over and over again that I'm not actually expecting God to speak to me when the time is right? I know that in junior church, before the lockdown, some of the children learned how to talk and listen to God, chatting to him and catching what he says. So you could spend a little bit of time chatting and catching now, and maybe you could teach your adults how to do this as well. Afterwards, you could see if you can find some Bibles and see if you can find the Old Testament and the New Testament, and see if you can find the story of Elizabeth and Zechariah in the book of Luke. Well, before I go, I just want to tell you about next week. Normally we have a light party around this time, but we can't have one this year. So instead, I'm planning a glow-in-the-dark treasure trail, hopefully next Sunday if the weather is okay. So I'll email full details to your parents, and I hope to see you then. Thanks for listening.